Welcome everybody to an event which a number of people were excited when we announced, and we immediately had a very quick sign up for this within the first hour on the new Congress in Brazil, not just what happened in the elections a couple of weeks ago, but what the institutional relationship or how it has evolved between the executive and the Congress over the last number of years. We have panelists, 3 experts today who will get into the dynamics as they are, as well as what the overlay of the dynamic with the recent elections. But before we do that, let me just give a few housekeeping details. There will be translation by Jairo Botelho from Portuguese into English. So some of our panelists may be speaking in Portuguese. You can listen to all of it in English. There will be a little bit of Portuguese, some back and forth, English into Portuguese as well, and Beatriz will help us with that interpretation. We will take questions as we always do, so please put them in the question and answer box. You all know how to do that, and we will do our best to weave those questions into the conversation that we have today. We very much welcome your questions. The only other detail or housekeeping detail that I can think of at the moment is that we will announce today, it's the first time public announcement, the launch of our new series on drug reform law or drug reform attempts through law in Latin America. And the first episode will, of course, be on Colombia, where drug reform law is very much a part of the platform of incoming president or current president Gustavo Petro. And we will have a panel discussion that will happen in a couple of weeks' time. Please look out in your emails for the information on that, but we're very, very excited about that series. We will be doing it in conjunction with Redestal and the Political Science Department at Northwestern University in the United States, with collaboration from many other organizations throughout the hemisphere and beyond, we believe. So I think with that out of the way, let's get on to the conversation that we have slated for today on Brazil, new Congress and challenges for the executive branch. We're very fortunate to count on the participation of Carolina Botelho, who is Associate Researcher at Laboratory of Electoral Studies, Political Communication and Public Opinion, Bruno Carazza, who's a columnist at Valor Econômico and a professor at Fundação Cabral, and Beatriz, who's the SNF Agora Visiting Fellow, Johns Hopkins University, and also a Senior Researcher, Center for Studies on Brazilian Congress, State University of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you all panelists for being with us today. This is obviously a very important topic that we think deserves coverage. We haven't seen it covered elsewhere, and that's one of the reasons why we think it needs to be covered, and we want to cover it so exhaustively today. With that said, I think I'll start with Carolina. If she could just give us a brief summary of the results of the Congress, the Senate elections concerning the balance of power between the various political forces in Brazil. Carolina, welcome and thank you.
Muito obrigada pelo convite, Kenneth. Eu agradeço você, a Marta. É um prazer falar aqui com a Beatriz, com o Bruno, com vocês nesse evento. E que eu julgo ser um fórum importantíssimo para a gente falar desse novo Brasil que está surgindo, ou pelo menos está em uma transformação ao longo desses últimos anos. Eu sou cientista política e, durante muito tempo, eu trabalhei com questões relacionadas ao legislativo e executivo. Nos últimos anos, tenho me dedicado bastante às pesquisas de opinião e tentar fazer uma ponte entre a pesquisa e a relação do governo com o Congresso e, ao mesmo tempo, tentar sentir os ânimos, né, e a temperatura da sociedade sobre as questões no Brasil, né? todo mundo já sabe, aí não é inédito para o mundo, que é um momento urgente, um momento com o qual a gente precisa ter bastante atenção e cuidado. Bom, no último final de semana foram eleitos grupos, né, de legisladores, tanto no Senado quanto na Câmara. Já temos uma composição de Congresso fechada para o próximo Brasil dos 4 anos que vem. E a minha avaliação, o primeiro olhar que eu tive para ela foi de bastante apreensão, porque nos últimos 4 anos foram 4 anos muito cansativos, em função de um grupo de políticos que simplesmente apareceu na esfera pública brasileira e que não tinha a comunicação tradicional daquilo que a gente entende como uma negociação política, né? Eram políticos muito ligados a uma ideia da antipolítica, de você achar ou considerar o sistema político como uma coisa perniciosa para a sociedade. Então, a expectativa dos cientistas políticos e dos analistas políticos é que, depois de 4 anos de muita dureza, muito cansaço, o Congresso poderia vir a compor uma certa maioria, novamente, de políticos profissionais dedicados às questões do Congresso, das suas relações tradicionais do Executivo com o Legislativo. Com a eleição, né, que o primeiro turno ocorreu semana passada, a gente percebeu que esse movimento ele não aconteceu tanto, né? Embora a gente não tenha tido uma composição de Congresso de políticos pouco profissionais ou muito ligados ao ideário da antipolítica, o que se confirmou, né, como os nossos novos deputados e senadores, é que a maioria se compõe de grupos da direita, lamentavelmente da extrema-direita, e grupos que já estavam se relacionando com o atual presidente, né, que todos já sabem que é uma pessoa que muito refratária aos valores democráticos e da institucionalidade. Então, assim, depois de longos 4 anos, a gente viu um Congresso novamente se compor com indivíduos, né, legisladores que se comunicam bem com o atual governo brasileiro, que tem sido bastante prejudicial à democracia, né? Então, a gente esperava descansar, mas estamos vendo que vão ser 4 anos também muito sérios e que demandam muita atenção. Por outro lado, quando a gente vai fazendo análise das siglas partidárias, a gente não vê muita diferença de outros anos para cá, né? As siglas, elas permanecem muito parecidas com outras composições de Congresso, portanto, eu acho que a gente deve deslocar o olhar para, primeiro, a composição desses legisladores dentro dessas siglas e como é que ele se comunica com o atual presidente, com a liderança hoje que governa, né? Essa é a grande questão, porque me obriga a pensar que se a gente mudar uma liderança, essa mesma composição ela pode mudar a negociação do Congresso com o Executivo, né? Então, a grande expectativa é que liderança vamos ter no Executivo no final do mês e que vai poder se comunicar de uma forma mais legítima, institucional e tradicionalmente política com o Congresso nos próximos anos.
If I could jump on following Carolina's remarks, and just to expand a little bit on what she mentioned about a shift to the right, what we see is you have a slight increase in the House of Representatives of members from what we call the Centrão, the big center, and a bigger increase in the Senate of members from these parties. So just to contextualize to our audience, the Centrão, the way I see it, is a group of parties or legislators that are located on the right of the political spectrum, but they lack ideological consistency. So what their main the main feature of their behavior is clientelism or patronage. They want cabinet appointments, cabinet positions, and budgetary grants more than anything else. So in the House, which is where things get more complicated, we have 260 members from the Centrão right now against 258 in the current congressional session. And the Centrão, although the size of this group is almost the same, Jair Bolsonaro's party, the president's party, is stronger in the House right now. It has 99 seats instead of 76 right now. So it's the largest bench, the largest party bench. What does it mean in practice? It means that the Centrão has the necessary number of legislators to form an absolute majority and approve regular bills in the House. And to approve constitutional amendments, they would need an additional 48 legislators. So they have an absolute majority to pass regular bills. The second largest party bench is the Workers' Party, the PT, Lula's party, which increased as well its size. It has now 68 elected against 56 in the current congressional session. The leftist party, all of them together, only have 125 seats, so a lot less than what the Centrão has. So just to, what does this mean in practice? No matter who wins the election, Bolsonaro or Lula, the Centrão will be a key player in executive legislative relations. And I can talk more about that later on, but I think that's the one thing that became clear to me after legislative elections. And I think this is important because we, as Carolina was saying, we don't know exactly how these people behave, right? And importantly, we don't know how they're going to behave in a Lula administration as opposed to a Bolsonaro administration.
Thanks, Beatriz. Bruno, what's your thought about the election results and what it may mean for the power of the Central in the new legislature?
Well, Kenneth, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to share my views and my studies about the Brazilian Congress with this Canadian Council attendance. Well, going deep into I think I made a X-ray about the new Congress, trying to take a deeper view about the composition of the Centrão, because this center, right and center politicians here in Brazil Congress, they are split into two groups, as Beatriz has said. We had a Bolsonaristas group, more radical, more more aggressive about the democratic rules of Brazilian democracy, and we had a more clientelists and more traditional politicians that in this current term they tended to support Bolsonaro. So if we take a look at the profile of the new Congress, as Beatriz has said, Bolsonaro's party, PL, the Liberal Party, and those that are supporting him as the Republicans and the Progressive Party. And we also have to take into account the União Brasil that intends to merge with Progressists. This Bolsonaro's alliance will have almost one half of the House of Representatives and 43% of the Senate. But on this group, as I said, we had a more Bolsonarista politicians and more traditional big center politicians. And according to my calculus, if we take military forces, if we take religious leaders, if we take into account the politicians that are supporting Bolsonaro since its first moment in the government, and if we take into account those current politicians that agree with Bolsonaro's orientation on more than 95% of votes on this Congress, I think Bolsonaro will have a loyal support of about 1/4 of the next House and 1/5 of the Senate. So Bolsonaro, I expect that Bolsonaro will have more influential power than he had on his first term, even if he loses the re-election, because 1/4 of the House and 1/5 of the Senate will be a bloc that will have a great influence on the next Congress, supporting Bolsonaro's views, and will be an obstacle for President Lula if he wins the election.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. I want to come back to some of the specific issues. That was great. I want to, Beatriz and Carolina, do you want to comment on what Bruno said about this? I know you've already touched a bit. You've already touched a little bit on this, but do you agree that this seems to be much greater power now for Bolsonaro and the Bolsonaristas in the legislature than that they had before? Do you agree with that, Beatriz?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I do. I think Bruno's analysis is on point. And I think even in a scenario that he gets reelected, it's even more problematic because Congress has been getting stronger over the last decades, and during his administration, in a way that it's not really good. I would say not institutionalized. I don't know, Kenneth, if you want me to do a recap of what happened in the last 2 decades.
We will get to that. We will get
Okay.
to that. I know you all the 3 panelists have done great scholarly and great analytical work on that, and we definitely are going to have a big block of time for that. So, but if we hold off for the second now, I just want to focus a little bit about the changes that we've been talking a little bit about, and maybe add a little something onto this while you have the mic at this point, Beatriz, and I'll ask Carolina back to Bruno. Are there specific issues now with the changing composition of the Central and of the legislature that you think will become more important, or that will be of big interest to the Central that they're going to want to move forward with now? Can you think of several issues?
I'm gonna give that to Bruno. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Carolina, do you want to jump in on that? Do you think the new Central has specific issues that they will want to see addressed in the new term?
Sorry, Beatriz, help me, please.
Basicamente, é a pergunta número 3 que ele está fazendo sobre o que o Centrão vai querer fazer agora que, com todo esse cenário que o Bruno descreveu, que eles têm bastante poder. E a gente já tinha falado que o Bruno ia ficar com essa pergunta.
Okay.
Sim.
I will jump on this.
All right, Bruno, I'm going to have Carolina go first, and then you will have the mic.
Eu gostaria de falar um detalhe. Antes do Bruno introduzir essa terceira questão, né, e voltando um pouco à composição do Congresso novo, tocando nos pontos da Beatriz e do Bruno, eu concordo absolutamente, mas acho que precisamos fazer um esforço também de lembrar que essa questão do Centrão e isso tem que ser rememorado quase que diariamente, o Centrão é um conjunto de partidos que não tem uma ideologia própria, a gente chama de amorfos, né? Mas que ele se junta a governos, a executivos, para simplesmente apoiar, né, nas decisões. Isso não necessariamente é ruim, né? Governos precisam de apoio legislativo. E o Centrão, tradicionalmente, nos últimos 30 anos, tem feito isso, né? Os partidos que compõem o Centrão estão lá para, em troca de cargos, de ministérios e de outras questões, eles são os partidos que apoiam qualquer governo no Brasil. O problema é como esse Centrão se configurou no momento em que o Bolsonaro foi eleito. Tá? Essa correlação de forças é que a gente precisa entender mais, né? Ele se tornou mais ideológico, mais clientelista, isso é um ponto a ser discutido e a ser observado daqui para frente. Mas, embora muito forte, embora tenha aumentado a composição no Congresso, ele é praticamente o mesmo Centrão que a gente vê nos últimos 30 anos. A diferença é a relação desse Centrão com a liderança que está hoje no governo, no Executivo. Né? Então, eu tendo a achar que essa relação modifica à medida que o Executivo se torna mais ou menos fraco. Né? O Centrão pôde vir mais à tona, a se mostrar esse Centrão do Bolsonaro mais forte e mais pernicioso para a institucionalidade brasileira, porque Bolsonaro foi perdendo capacidade de governar e podia sofrer impeachment. Né? Houve uma troca muito clientelística e de natureza assim, ruim para a democracia, de que a única maneira do Bolsonaro manter sua governabilidade era transferir o poder a esse grupo, esse conjunto de partidos que, liderado pelo PP e pelo PL, para garantir governabilidade ao presidente. Então, essa força extra transferida atipicamente, ineditamente para o legislativo, só foi permitida porque a gente tem um executivo que estava fraco, cheio de denúncias e com ameaça de impeachment limitar o seu governo. Né? Nesse momento, ele transfere qualquer tipo de recurso público a uma geleia de partidos que apoiaria ele em qualquer situação.
Can I jump
Thank you,
on?
Carolina. Oh, Beatriz, you want to jump in? Please.
Yeah, I think I agree in part with what Carolina said, because I'll go back to this later, but I do think that the strengthening of the Centrão is also a product of the strengthening of Congress, and that precedes Bolsonaro by many years. So I think although Bolsonaro abdicated his legislative prerogatives, the strengthening of Congress precedes him. And to me, the difference is until his administration, it was happening in an institutionalized way, and now it's not. So now things got out of the rails. But I can discuss that later. I'll give it to Bruno. Sorry, Bruno.
Yeah, no. Beatriz, we're getting closer to that block of time where we're going to delve into that, exactly what you're talking about, the history behind that. And this is a critical key of what we want to get to today. But you're right, let's let Bruno jump in. I think what Beatriz and what Carolina said are very, very interesting, Bruno, for a lot of reasons. And I know you want to respond to what they've said, but playing off of a question also that we got from Fiona Mackey, and thank you, Fiona, for your question, is while the way it's been described is a Central's patronage and those kinds of other attributes, Lula, on the other hand, if he wins, is maybe playing with a harder composition of a little further to the right than he would like, but he's also very experienced in dealing with Congress and dealing with this kind of a situation. So the question also goes is, despite the further right-wing tilt on the Central, would the Central respect Lula's power and work with Lula in a way that would not necessarily mean they're following what Bolsonaro or the right wing tells them to do? Sort of long question, but hopefully you get what I was trying to say.
Okay, it's an excellent question. Well, if Lula wins, a third term, he will have, just from parties from the left, he will have 25% of the House and less than 20% of the Senate. So he will depend on to attract more politicians from the center. And when we say politicians from the center, we had a traditional center, politicians from parties that used to have huge influence on the Brazilian politicians, like the MDB, like the former Fernando Henrique Cardoso's PSDB, and the Gilberto Kassab's PSD. So it was a bloc from the center that used to rule the legislative power in Brazil since the beginning of the new phase of democracy in Brazil. But this group is losing power and is losing strength in Brazilian politics. So Lula probably will have to negotiate also with Central members. But as Carolina has said, that Central is a group that tends to adapt to its new government. But I have a point that I don't agree. I don't fully agree with Carolina that Central, okay, they adapt to the new government and they can adapt to a new Lula's term. But they are also a very conservative politicians. They are also politicians that, in general, they have support from economic groups, especially from the agribusiness sector in Brazil. So if Lula wins, he will have to negotiate with those groups, and those politicians, they are not expected to, for example, support a progressist agenda from Lula's. So that is why I expect that Lula will have a moderated government. He will have to concede in some aspects, and we cannot. We also have to take into account that economic conditions in Brazil will be hard on the whole world, and here, especially here in Brazil. So probably Lula will have to accept conditions to pass his reforms, and I don't expect a very progressist agenda from Lula on an eventual next term.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. I know, Beatriz, you had your hand up. If you could just wait for 1 second, Beatriz. I just want to do a follow-up with Bruno and then come to you, and then to Carolina again, of course. So based on what you were just saying, Bruno, and sort of the moderating effect, what are there specific issues, tax reform or other kinds of, or, we have a question, although it's slightly different orientation, but on the Amazon, right? And on environment, how will that affect what we've been talking about, affect Lula's attempt to do, what he wants to do on some of those or other issues? Do you have some thought about that?
Okay, I think that in the beginning, Lula will try to spend his political gains on the beginning of on this honeymoon in the beginning of the government, of an eventual new government, to pass some economic measures, like fiscal measures and even a tax reform or even an administrative reform. He will have to do with this because the fiscal conditions in Brazil are especially weak after the electoral use of fiscal measures from Bolsonaro in order to try to win the elections. So he will have to pass some agenda on economic terms, and on the environmental agenda and on the Amazon. I think that Lula will, on the first days of his government, he will use his power to change a lot of infralegal measures that Bolsonaro changed during his government. So he will use his power of decree to change a lot of anti-environmental measures that Bolsonaro's government has implemented during this term. And on the Congress regarding environmental agenda, I think that Lula will have problems because the group that supports agribusiness and mining sector is stronger on the new Congress in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Beatriz, thank you for being patient. You have the floor.
I just wanted to add to Fiona's question about Lula and how he will build a coalition in Congress. I think Bruno touched upon one important point, which is how the Centrão will behave. Carolina talked about that as well, but I think there are two other things going on that I think are going to be key for us and for Lula himself to figure out how he's going to handle this Congress that was elected. The first is that the executive branch has fewer tools to build a coalition right now. And I can explain that if people are interested, but the president, Lula, if president, will have fewer tools because of changes that were made for on budgetary grants. So he will have fewer tools. And on top of that, we had a number of institutional reforms this election that reduced the number of parties represented in Congress. So according to what I understand, the president will need the support of about 10 parties and not the 17 that the last president needed, Bolsonaro, at the beginning of Congress to form a coalition. This wouldn't be a problem if the president had all the tools that he had, like, I don't know, 15 years ago. That's not the case. So I don't know how he's going to balance the fact that it's going to be hard for him to find alternatives to, for example, Jair Bolsonaro's party, which has 99 seats in the House, with fewer tools. So I think these other two parameters are going to be very important, and I think people should be looking at them to see how Lula is going to act.
Okay, thank you, Beatriz. Hold on, I want to go to Carolina, and then we're going to come back to talk exactly about the historical evolution, or at least during the last 10 years, I think is a time frame that you've given, or even further perhaps, and what that really means, the structure, the changes in the structural relationship. Carolina, I'm coming back to you. Anything that you've heard from Bruno and Beatriz that you'd like to comment on, or something else about the problems or the challenges Lula will have in trying to do some basic things like environmental issues in terms of protecting the social issues? There's a lot of conversation about, women in Brazil, and violence against women in Brazil, and reproductive rights, and all these kinds of social issues that were were moved by Bolsonaro and sort of his view of what that is. Do you have any thoughts about that, Carolina?
Eu acho que o grande desafio do presidente Lula, se eleito, né? A gente tem que pensar que a gente está num cenário ainda muito indefinido, embora com vantagem para Lula, né? É alguma vantagem, é uma vantagem importante, mas ela não é ainda, de fato, uma vantagem que qualquer analista político possa assegurar que ele vai ser eleito chefe do executivo, tá? Então, precisamos primeiro passar, estruturar esse patamar. Ainda está indeciso, né, o cenário político brasileiro. Mas, uma vez eleito o presidente Lula, eu acho que o maior desafio dele, e que é diferente de outros governos que ele geriu, né, e de os outros governos anteriores a Bolsonaro, é tirar desse centrão que hoje é majoritário no Congresso, né, praticamente dividido em torno de 2 partidos, que é o PL e o PP, o orçamento, que antes era uma prerrogativa, né, do Executivo, né, para determinadas medidas. Nos últimos 10 anos, 15 anos, esse orçamento que está sendo realizado no Brasil, ele ficava muito mais sob a supervisão do executivo, do chefe do executivo, para negociar com os legisladores do que o que a gente tem assistido até então. Volto àquela questão, na direção de manter a sua governabilidade, o Jair Bolsonaro entregou, de certa forma, o orçamento público na mão de partidos que querem ser reeleitos e querem ser governo a qualquer custo, independente de Jair Bolsonaro. Então, assim, o maior desafio, se Lula for eleito, é negociar com esse Congresso majoritariamente composto por esse grupo do Centrão, quem é que vai decidir o orçamento. Esse para mim, é o maior desafio. As outras agendas, seja a agenda em relação ao meio ambiente, à Amazônia, e inclusive de comportamento, eu acho que ela vai vir depois, e é negociada depois desse principal debate, que é quem vai ter a caneta e o poder de decidir sobre o orçamento. Hoje a gente está vendo esse grupo que apoia o Bolsonaro distribuir recursos públicos para onde eles quiserem, com expectativa totalmente eleitoreira de se manter no poder, né? Então, assim, independente de outras questões, outras variáveis que vão desafiar o novo presidente, se houver esse novo presidente, a principal para mim é quem vai ficar com o recurso público, a detenção da definição e da decisão de como alocar e transferir esses recursos públicos para a sociedade.
Thank you, Carolina. I think that sets up perfectly for Beatriz now, the control of the budget and the who actually controls and what aspects of it, and the evolution over the last, as I think we mentioned, decade or a little bit more in that area and other areas in the relationship between the executive and the legislative branch. So Beatriz, maybe this is the time for you to talk a little bit about your insight on the evolution of that relationship and what it means going forward. No matter who wins, actually, no matter who wins the presidential race.
Right, thank you. I just want to say that I fully agree with Carolina. I think that's the main issue right now. Nothing else will get done unless this gets discussed. So I think the first thing I would like to say and reinstate is that Congress has been getting more powerful over the years before Bolsonaro, right? The process really started in the early 2000s with a reform that disincentivized the use of executive decrees, which is one of the president's main legislative tools. And then in 2015 and 2019, in Brazil, we have what we call budgetary grants, which in the US are, these are known as earmarks, now community project funding after the reform. So in Brazil, we have individual earmarks, collective earmarks. What happened prior to these reforms is that the executive could use them as a tool to build support. So we would go to legislators and say, I'm going to actually spend this money if you support my coalition. this ended with the reforms done in 2015 and 19 because it made the spending of these earmarks mandatory. So now whenever they are decided, it has to be spent, the money has to be spent. So the executive lost leverage. And that's what I meant a few minutes ago when I said that the president has fewer tools. It doesn't, the president, no matter who is the president, it's not, he will not have these tools, right? What happened during the Bolsonaro administration is a continuation of this process, but in the worst way possible. When Bolsonaro decided to build a legislative coalition halfway through his tenure, he discovered that he could not use the earmarks as a tool to do that. And so what he did together with the House and the Senate speakers is what Brazilian media has coined the secret budget, which is another type of earmark that has been distributed to form Bolsonaro's coalition in non-transparent and sometimes illegal ways. That was the solution Bolsonaro came up with the two speakers. I don't think, so two things can happen. The one thing is that the Supreme Court might take it down. There is a process going on the Supreme Court to analyze that. I don't think they're gonna discard it completely. I think it's more likely that they're gonna change it. But this is key for whoever takes office, right? Either Bolsonaro or Lula. What happens with the secret budget is a very important piece of the puzzle, because right now it's the only thing that gives leverage to the president to build a coalition. Without that, the president only has cabinet positions. So yeah, I think I think Lula also cannot afford to keep it, even if the Supreme Court doesn't act, because it's non-transparent. And as I said, the press has been saying it's illegal, or at least parts of it. So I think I agree fully with Carolina. What happens with the budget and who controls the budget, especially the earmarks, is a key part of the process. I don't know if Bruno has something to add to that. I bet he does, because he's nodding. So.
Yeah, thanks, Faces. I'm sure Bruno does. Bruno, the floor is yours.
Well, I agree with Beatriz. During this current term, Bolsonaro has given control of the budget for the Congress, and it's a problem that the last presidents here in Brazil faced it. Dilma Rousseff faced this problem, and Michel Temer too. And we are facing gradual and during this Bolsonaro's term, rapid deterioration of the presidential powers in face of improvement of the Congress in Brazilian politics. So if we take this Congress, this new Congress, we can expect that this pressure from the Congress will continue in the next term, especially because we don't know who will be the next president, but the next president will have just a slight majority of Brazilian electorate. So the next president will won't have an electoral power to impose his will over the Congress, because he will face the opposition of a half of the Brazilian population. So the Congress probably will enjoy this position and will continue to impose his power over the executive in Brazil on the next four years, whoever will be the next president.
So Bruno, let me follow up with that. We've up until now, or part of up until now, we've gone under the assumption or the construct of, if it were a Lula victory, for the presidency. Let's turn it around. Let's say Bolsonaro wins the presidency. Everything that we've been talking about the secret budget, about the growing power of the legislature, about the balance of power, how might that play out in a Bolsonaro presidency?
Well,
it's a simple question, I know, but
yeah. Well, if we analyze the profile of each of the 513 new representatives, we can take the new legislature, the new Congress, is split on 4 blocks. We have Bolsonaristas, we have the Central members, we have the old center parties, and we will have the left. So each of them will have almost 25% of the new Congress. So if Bolsonaro will be elected, he will have the support of the Bolsonaristas and also the Central members. So probably he will have half of the Congress without needing to negotiate, because he ceded a lot of power to the Congress nowadays. So he will have the control of the half of the Congress, and probably he will push the new Congress to try to control the 3 powers. He will control the executives, he will control the legislative, and probably he will use his power to approve a lot of measures. We don't know if he will increase the number of the members of the Supreme Court, or he will try to impeach some of the current judiciary members. So he will try to control also the Supreme Court. And in this case, probably we will have a deterioration of the democratic conditions in Brazil on the next 4 years, because he will probably control the 3 powers of the Brazilian Republic.
thank you, Bruno. Well, that's uplifting. Carolina, your thoughts about that? The implications of a Bolsonaro victory on the balance of power, and as Bruno said, not just vis-a-vis the legislative branch, but the judicial branch, and any other kinds of major issues that you may want to talk about.
Quando eu vejo, assim, que mais alerta e que mais precisamos chamar atenção, a primeira preocupação foi que essa renovação, a gente não teve uma taxa de renovação tão alta quanto na eleição passada, embora uma renovação ainda alta. O Senado passou a ser uma coisa mais preocupante, porque a gente conseguiu eleger 1/3 da casa nessa eleição, com senadores com os quais Bolsonaro consegue lidar muito bem, tem lidado até então, né? Então, a grande questão aí é quanto de ideológico desse Senado, né, ligado ao Bolsonaro, foi eleito e quanto vai poder deixar de ser, né? O que a gente tem visto na casa é que parte de bolsonaristas, né, de apoiadores do Bolsonaro, bastante ideológicos, e que vem defendendo o Bolsonaro, foram eleitos para uma casa que pode pedir, inclusive, como o Bruno falou, o impeachment, fazer maioria para o impeachment eventual de algum ministro do Supremo, ou simplesmente mudar a configuração, aumentando o número de ministros do Supremo. Indo para a Câmara dos Deputados, eu tendo a achar, assim, reforço que eu tenho dito, que os partidos, nas suas siglas, eles não estão diferenciando tanto das demais siglas da última década. Tá? Mas dentro dessas siglas há os políticos com os quais a gente precisa ter atenção e cuidado. Essa é a grande questão, é quanto a gente vai conseguir separar um representante do Centrão que sempre atuou na Nova República, desde a Nova República até agora, e daquele ator político, daquele legislador que vai ser uma força pactuada com Bolsonaro para denegrir, para violentar ainda mais as instituições. A gente ainda não tem esse panorama de certo. A gente sabe que esse Centrão, que hoje foi reeleito, parte dele está com Bolsonaro até agora. Se eles vão continuar com Bolsonaro, né, para medidas mais radicais, como uma mudança abrupta da composição do Supremo ou de simplesmente de fechamento mais do Congresso, a gente não tem essa certeza, embora haja uma expectativa ruim sobre isso, porque até então esses legisladores estão com Bolsonaro. Então, assim, o meu maior medo é continuar esse processo de deterioração democrática, ajudado por essa composição do Congresso, que não é tão diferente de outras que a gente teve, mas com a influência de uma liderança perniciosa e que exalta comportamentos completamente antidemocráticos. Dito isso, ainda é preocupante que parte desses legisladores, embora as siglas permaneçam parecidas com a dos últimos anos, há alguns muito ligados à extrema-direita e que claramente funcionariam como uma base de apoio ao presidente a despeito de qualquer matéria, tá? Só que não é a maioria. Eu ainda sou otimista e acho que esse Centrão ele pode repactuar suas demandas e suas urgências de acordo com uma nova liderança. O grande problema é se Bolsonaro for reeleito e mantiver a trajetória de imposições das agendas sobre o Congresso, como ele tem feito até então.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. So Beatriz, I'm putting together what Bruno said and what Carolina said, and I'm thinking that despite the power of the legislature, because of the way it's currently composed, and because of the way Bruno and Carolina just framed it for us, under a Bolsonaro victory, it may be that the legislature isn't much of a blocking mechanism for some of the bad or worst excesses of what a Bolsonaro presidency might look like. Because do you see the legislative branch exerting any real power or counterbalance?
I think I'm going to go back to what I said about the lack of tools, right? I think regardless of who wins the election, the president needs to have tools to build a coalition. And we don't have clarity on what's going to happen in relation to that. If Bolsonaro is reelected and the Supreme Court ends the secret budget, he's going to have to find a new tool. So I think there's, besides the fact, as Carolina and Bruno were saying, that we still don't know what this Centrão looks like, although I tend to agree with Bruno's breakdown of police officers and agribusiness. I think these people are very ideological, even though it's not a party ideology, right? It's a different sort of ideological cohesiveness that we have there. But regardless of that, like, the president's going to need tools. Bolsonaro is going to need tools. And if the Supreme Court dismantles the secret budget, he's going to have to find a new one. I don't think that legislators are interested in losing the power that they have received. I don't think anybody in politics is interested in losing power. So I think we should expect a Congress, if given the proper incentives by Bolsonaro, to support him even more, because they're getting, so just for you to have an idea, the earmarks in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, the amount of federal investments done through earmarks jumped from 8% in 2017 to almost 40% in the next budgetary year. So it's a lot of money that Congress controls right now, right? It's a lot of money. I don't see Congress wanting to lose that power regardless of the administration. And I think that the secret budget is a key for that. So I would encourage people to watch the next moves of the Supreme Court in relation to that, because besides who gets elected, we need to see what's going to happen with the secret budget.
Thank you, Beatriz. We're pretty much near the end of our hour, but I'll ask all three of you, starting with Bruno and then Catalina, finishing with Beatriz, just very briefly, or any final comments or thoughts that you want to add before we finish. Bruno, any final thoughts? Oh, you're on mute, Bruno.
Sorry.
Now you're off mute. Great,
I
thanks.
would just thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share my views about the Brazilian politics. And I will emphasize that due to this new balance of the Congress in Brazil, I think that we'll face some difficult times if Bolsonaro wins and tries to implement his autocratic agenda on the next term. And even if Lula wins, he will probably have to govern with a coalition of more centered or center-right representatives, in addition to the left. So I think that the Congress will have the power to maintain these tools that that Beatriz has said about the budget tools, the legislative prerogatives, and I don't expect progressive agenda from Lula, because he won't have the political support in Congress to pass, and he will have more troubles than he had 20 years ago when he was a president. So I think that Lula will have a less ambitious government than his current electoral promises. And this the reality we'll face in the next 4 years, in my view. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bruno. Carolina, any final thought or two?
Sim, eu gostaria de agradecer a oportunidade, é uma satisfação falar sobre a política no Brasil. Acho que essa discussão tem que ser feita e é o momento. E eu divido as minhas expectativas de duas formas. A primeira é que, se houver, de fato, a reeleição do atual presidente, isso representa uma perda para a nossa democracia, porque acho que a trajetória de abalar a democracia vai persistir. Todas as forças que ele puder reunir em torno disso e em direção a uma autocracia, elas vão ser cada vez mais postas e com mais legitimidade, porque ele vai passar a ser um vencedor nas urnas. Mas pensando num outro cenário, que tem até mais probabilidade, que é a vitória do ex-presidente Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, eu acredito que, primeiro, se restaura certa legitimidade democrática, refortalece as instituições democráticas, mas é um governo diferente dos outros, mais desafiador, porque estamos vivendo uma questão fiscal grave, uma questão econômica grave, uma questão social grave, né, e com pouco poder orçamentário por parte do executivo para poder ter decisões, né, para mudar esse quadro no médio, curto prazo. Então, mesmo assim, mesmo com um cenário que é desafiador para o ex-presidente Lula, para a legitimidade das instituições democráticas brasileiras, isso é o melhor que tem que acontecer para o Brasil nesse segundo turno. Obrigada.
Thanks so much, Catalina. Beatriz, you have the honor of the last word.
I wanted to say thank you to you, Kenneth, and to Marta for putting this panel together. I love Congress. I know it's a contentious position to have in Brazil, but I do love the institution, so it's a pleasure for me to talk about it anytime. I just want to second what both Bruno and Carolina said. I do think that if Bolsonaro gets reelected, we're going to see even more democratic erosion in Brazil. And I think that's where I draw the line in terms of saying my political preferences. I'm pro-democracy. So because of that, I really hope that Lula gets elected.
Yeah, it sounds, the last little bit, it sounded a bit what President Obama said about Donald Trump, saying that he thought the US democracy could withstand 4 years of Donald Trump. He wasn't sure it could withstand 8. And it sounds like exactly what the summary comments were from all 3 of you. Thanks you again for your time. Thanks for all our listeners. A video of this event will be posted today, hopefully, no later than tomorrow on our website at ccacanada.com. So it's free and it's accessible to all. Thank you for joining us again, and we hope to see you next time. This is not an issue which we will ignore going forward. So we hope to count on all 3 of you panelists again. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.